Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And this week, we're looking at those business leaders who should be making the move from billing to building in their own role. So people stop billing. It's really interesting when you start to look at the marketplace. We know that 79% of the marketplace in the UK has less than 10 heads, which says that there's a lot of recruitment leaders out there who are still billing. And if they want to grow and scale their business, should be moving off the tools to help them grow. So that's the challenge we're going to hit head on this week. As usual, I'm joined by Dave. Dave looks like he's in some sort of cast iron bunker, but he's out at one of the expos. So enjoy. So, Dave, going to hit you with the first question. Always an interesting one. The most SME recruitment business owners that we meet who are still billing keep saying I'll step away from billing once the team is ready. How do you actually make that call? And then, more to the point, how do you make it stick?
I think, Ad, it's such a good question. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, it's such a good question because we do see that so often. And right now, where we're in the middle of this bizarre action in the Middle East, the threats that could bring if it goes on long, every focus will be on billing. And if you're leading your business and you've got others in your business, you're going to want to bring the money in or protect the money that you've got. And if that means that you do it yourself, it's difficult to argue that that's not a good strategy. But you've got to have your people ready and you've got to examine yourself. Well, how do I know when they're ready? What are the markers in the ground that says I can hand some of this work or all of this work over to develop my team? So the first part of the question for me, Ad, is you've got to assess how do you know when they're ready? What are the metrics you're going to use to say when the team is ready? Because the reality is, whatever your end game is from a strategic point of view, the longer that you are the main person driving the business and billing in the business, the less valuable your business becomes. So you've got to look at it and say, if I want to grow this to make a lifestyle, and I'm very happy with the money that I've got coming in, and I'd like some more, that's you may have a different answer. But if you're trying to scale your business to have some event or to make your business more interesting, you have to grow and have a look at the people who are working for you and move them on. So establish in your own mind how you're going to do that. What are the metrics you're going to use? And how much of your time are you spending in learning and development with those staff? Who is it that you can look out into your team and say, yeah, I'm going to develop those people and make them better? And we'll come on to this later, but it doesn't mean you have to promote your biggest biller.
Yeah. And I think it's down to what I class as the owner dependency trap, that sort of circular logic that keeps them at their desk that I'm the best, but I can keep doing that. And I think most leaders know the answers intellectually of what they should be doing, but haven't really been able to act on it. And I think it's usually because they lack the knowledge. They're a startup and they were the biggest biller probably in the company that they came from, and therefore they've never actually transitioned into a non-billing position. And it's like that sometimes these type of people ask for permission. I remember I've been at quite a few conferences just recently of the team network, and people are talking about this, and it was about almost asking a permission. Do they have a roadmap for how to get across that situation and what to do? And I think a lot of people are really worried about that situation. And I think the specific moment that a leader decides to step back should be based on what you said on data and what's actually good for the business, not for ego or anything like that. And understanding what will make it possible and what happens when they do it is really essential. I think where they've lived on experience in their current position as a biller, now it's not. It's something different. And it's not a framework, it's not a theory, it's what happens. I remember when I did it, and admittedly I didn't do it in my own business. I went from Lorien, where I was a billing manager with a large team and a large target, to a non-billing manager at Computer People with a bigger team. And I'd say that team was failing, but the one thing that helped me was understanding that if I could get everyone in my team to build what I'd expect to build myself, then I could start to move my business forward. And what I started to do is divide that among them. I thought that would be fine. But once I stepped back, I knew that I was reliant on the commission from my team, not from myself. And that sort of gave me a different mindset. I found that I took that single-minded approach I had to my own success and said, right, if I can make each individual person grow, and I start to look at who was brilliant, how do I make them grow? I start to look at who weren't particularly very good. What do I do with them? And I thought there's certain people in my business shouldn't be in my business. So I succeeded. I was scared. Yes. Did I have doubts? But I stuck at the strategy that I put in place. And after a while, that strategy started to work. So I think it's identifying the high flyers. What can you do with them? Identifying those that have got management skills. What can you do with them? How do you guide them? And I think it's, we talked about the big biller syndrome. I think it's stopping those in the business who shouldn't be in those type of positions, being in those positions, but giving them alternatives. And I think it's molding that high performing team takes courage, and it takes longer to create than you think it is. And I think that's the big thing. It takes longer than you think it actually takes. Therefore, stepping straight off the tools isn't the answer to the question, really.
No.
If we move on, I think there's a lot of SME businesses out there and lots of large recruitment businesses. The top billers are nowhere near ready to manage, but the owner needs to promote somebody. So how do you build a leadership team when people with the most potential are the ones most unlikely to lead? They simply want to bill and carry on billing. So what do we actually do with that?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is about promotion. You can't promote people into a position that doesn't exist. So we have this situation where people just say, you've been here 4 years, you've been here 8 months or whatever, I'm going to promote you. I'm going to make you from junior to senior or whatever. Does the position exist? How different is that position? And do they have the skills for it? If the position exists or you've created a new position, that's fine. But don't feel you have to promote people. It's a conversation with somebody about how they're going to do their work and what guide that they need to get into the next role should one exist within the business. I think you've just got to make sure that you're having conversations with your staff about development. Not everybody wants to be promoted. Not everybody wants the next big position. If they're doing well in the position they're in, keep them there. I've told the story many times of a guy called Phil, who was my best resourcer on a sales floor of about 100 people. He was my best resourcer. And it came to the manager saying to him, we're going to make you a salesperson. And he said, please don't make me a salesperson. I just love finding talent and resourcing. 20 years on, he is the head of resourcing of one of the largest companies based in the UK, but they're an international company. He's got 35 staff. He manages an off-site team. So in terms of skills and leadership, he's absolutely grown, but he hasn't been promoted into something that he didn't want to be. So you've got to have those conversations with each of your team, decide which of them have the capability, what are the skills gap, can you overcome that with training, with learning, what are they doing about learning themselves to show that they're developing themselves, and then you make a decision as to whether you can promote them and take them on. You've just got to continue to encourage performance and have the conversation. At JM, I had an excellent lady who was £1 million winner. Was obvious. She could be a really good leader and she could translate those skills, but she didn't want to do that. So she carried on. And still to this day, she's doing excellent work for the company she works with, but isn't leading and managing anybody. It's horses for courses. You may have people in your businesses that are not as good at selling, but are very good at leadership. So you have to look at those as well.
So I think I'm on the same path as you there. I think the challenge of identifying and developing a leadership potential in people who are wired as the classic high performance recruitment in every recruitment business is every recruitment leader's challenge. And I think that's one of the most sort of painful blockers that recruitment agencies leaders have. And the owners can see the gap clearly, but don't know how to close it. And I think they don't know how to close it without losing a top biller or upsetting a new person they bring somebody in. And usually if they promote the top biller that hasn't got management, then they're setting up to fail. And they fail. Not only do they lose the top biller, but they obviously lose staff underneath that as well because the havoc that causes. And I think the question is always how you distinguish between billing talent and leadership potential in your own team is critical. And I think if you want to step off the tools, you've got to start by evaluating your own team and looking at management traits and looking at weaknesses. It then involves setting out a career ladder that highlights both the journey of a top biller and one of a manager, but highlighting the differences between the traits that are required for each individual role and how it's important. And I think I've told this story before on here that, I was working with an IT client who was about 25, 30 heads in the business, had a load of number of billers who had failed in management. And I went on to do a management course. And I said, right, okay, I want all your top billers in the course. And I want the people that you think have got management potential. And it was really interesting. Halfway through the course, their top biller came to me and said, look, I failed 3 times trying to build a team and destroyed the team and gone back to billing. Now I understand what management is all about. I don't want to be a manager. And you've really classified that to me. And I said, great. So what do you want to do? He said, I want to be a biller. I want to learn how to build more. And I said, okay, what about management? He said, when I'm ready, I now know what I need to do and I'll come back to it. 18 months later, that guy stepped back off billing and to be a manager, wanted to become a manager. He's now running the largest team in the business and the most profitable team. But he said all the time, he said, I didn't expect what a management needs and what I need from that tool. So I think we've got to think about that happens constantly, that we promote the big biller. Now he stayed, and it's very lucky for the business that he stayed. Okay, but most big billers leave because they feel undermined and they feel there's nowhere else to go. And I think it's giving them separate routes and separate places to go and work on that sort of thing. So I think we need to look at both sides of the coin, billers and manager, and who will eventually lead and how you get that person to it. It's interesting that the second and third largest team in those businesses are now run by people who were average billers but had really good billing potential, management potential, and work from.
And I've seen that so often. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've seen that so often now.
Yeah, so we've got to start thinking about, it's not just about the money; it's about the attributes of what does that. So that's what needs to be laid out first. So again, in most SME businesses that we've interviewed, about 40% of the revenue still comes from the leader when they're in that sort of there, and it's usually a lot more. Most agree that that's a problem. We agree that that's a problem too. But every time we try and transfer a client, it feels like, every time a client tries to transfer a client over to somebody else in the business, it feels like they're handing over something that they spent years building. Years, it's their baby, it's their business, it's their client, it's their what's going on. So how do you actually do it without the wheels coming off?
Well, I mean, I've been in exactly the same situation. I was an account director for one of the big banks. I had 100+ contractors working for me. I did a good job. The client thought I did a good job, but it came to the fact that I was then promoted into a sales director role, which did exist, and they planned that for me. So I did have to hand it over. And the question is that I was asked by my boss, which applies to today, is who does the client belong to? Does the client belong to you, Dave, as an individual, or does it belong to the company? Yeah, of course, the answer is it belongs to the company. And if you do have a very good trusted relationship with the individual or the individuals who work for that client, they are going to accept that you're handing it over to somebody else. And if you give the client a plan to say, this is the lady who's going to take over from me, this is how it's going to happen, does it involve the client, does this work? Most of those transitions go absolutely fine. And the fear of, am I going to lose business because it's not me, also dissipates. Because remember, if you're moving on to something else, you're moving on to something else to add value to the business, to create more people, to develop people, to open up new geographies, to open up new services. So what you're doing is value add. You need to let go of that relationship. And of course, at the top end, and we've always said this, executives running recruitment businesses, the top people should know the top 20, 30, 40 clients. So you're not going to lose touch with the people you've been successful with, because you're going to keep in touch. You may be doing customer reviews. You may be doing reviews of your own staff and how they're doing. All of that cements the relationship even further. And then you've got somebody else to do the delivery, implement the strategy, and develop that account. So I just think it has to be done. It has to be done in a measured and managed way. But remember, even if it's your business, it's the company's who owns the client, and you don't grow by holding on to things.
I always think about revenue concentration. And I'll give you, I was dealing with a client about 18 months ago, and we helped him on this transitional period. He was an exceptional biller. And when I mean exceptional, he was billing £4 million a year.
Okay.
His business was doing £10 million a year.
Right.
His business had 18 people in. So I said, you're the biggest threat and you're the biggest potential. And his answer was, what, on my revenue? I said, no, your biggest potential is to take those other 18 people and develop them. Because if you take 4 million between those 18 and you can get them to deliver that 18 million, what else can you do? And he suddenly understood that it was the emotional attachment to his clients and that fear that what happens if I transfer it to somebody else? And what you're saying is absolutely right. Even though it's his business, they're his clients, but it's his business. So as a leader, you most likely know when you're the commercial problem. And he understood that he was the problem. Okay. And the problem is usually it's a human problem. It's a skills match. And I think we fail because we fear moving that person. And often the fear is that the client development is a better relationship with the person. Yeah. I think his fear was very simple. He feared that the clients that he's developing wouldn't get the same relationship. But he also said on the quiet, I also fear what happens if they develop a relationship with someone else that's better than mine. And I said, well, that's exactly what you want, isn't it? You want that. But it was that sort of ego fear that was there. So the practical process, the transition in a client relation should be easy. People buy from people they like, and people buy from people like them. So rather than giving it just to your biggest biller or the person, find the person that fits with the client. Find the person that fits in that client style and what that client does. Then it's the biller is like them, and the client will eventually like them as a normal person. And I think that's what we need to do. So if you identify that person, then that's what I do. So sometimes it might be not the biggest biller. Sometimes it might be one of the lowest billers in the business is that you say, right, I've got a really opportunity here. This is what I give because you two are very much alike. And I think you'll actually get on and work that way. And it might take a while for all parties to feel confident, but you've got to remember as the owner of the business, the leader or a billing manager, the top billing manager, you can still interact with the client. You can still work with the client. You can still develop the client, but you've got to step away from that relationship. And you've got to make the client and the person feel safe. Because once they feel safe, then you'll start to feel safe as well. And I think sometimes the clients, sorry, I'm talking about clients, I'm talking recruitment agencies. Recruitment agencies feel that they are indispensable rather than feeling that could I delegate this to somebody else and make them more indispensable so that I can go do something else within my business that will make my business more indispensable. Because if you are the biggest biller in the business, then you are massively devaluing your business when someone comes to buy it because you are the business to a certain degree. So I think it's about taking that relationship and finding the people in the business that would fit and suit the relationship and growing it from there rather than just giving it to the biggest biller or the biggest operator in the marketplace, or in some cases worse still, giving it to the lowest person in the business or a resourcer who they think they can manage the business and can't actually manage it. You still need a good salesperson in there to work it. Here's a question that when I was writing the questions, I was starting to think quite heavily about identity and what goes on. Most leaders say they need to build a reputation as the best biller in the room so that everyone can see that they can do the role. Okay. They think that the team respects them because of that. So if they stop billing, how should they lead a sales team when they're not selling anymore and stay relevant to that sales team?
Well, I guess the question, Howard, is what does leadership look like in your organization? What is the culture in your organization? Clearly, strong billing, strong numbers, strong client development, which gets you those billing and numbers, is one of the main facets to keep the business going and growing. However, what about courage? What about leadership? What about strategy? What about development? What about gratitude? What about all the things that we know that culturally make up a really successful recruitment business? And how do you compare on those things? Because sometimes you do have to let go of the numbers in order to grow other people. Now, if you've got a business with 5 or 6 staff, you should be thinking about, well, where's the next leader coming from, and how are you developing them, and what does leadership look like in your organisation? Can you become a person of influence? Whether you're 5 people or 50 people, does your business have influence? Do you as an individual have influence? Do you show gratitude to your staff? Are your staff saying that you develop them? All of those things absolutely matter. And they are as important as the numbers, because otherwise you'll end up running a very good company where, to your example that you spoke about a few minutes ago, Howard, you're the biggest biller by far. And that makes your business less valuable, depending on what you want to do with it. So I would focus on other aspects of leadership as well as the numbers, and you get a cocktail together, and decide, well, actually, who's going to take on these next responsibilities, and what do I need to do to develop?
I think it's really funny, isn't it, that the belief that credibility as a leader is irreseparable from personal performance. I think that's massively wrong. And I think it's what we class as personal performance, whether it's billing performance or whether it's leading. And I think your comment there about it's about what leadership is. And I think the shift is where I think it's that shift in where the leader finds credibility is really important. And I'll go from my personal results and leading a team. And when I went into CP, I'd never had management training. In fact, I didn't get any management training at all until I became a director at CP and Adecco, which was quite interesting. But I knew that to create the best people in the room, I had to create the right conditions and look at how I praised and let people get on with it. And honestly, it took me a long time to feel comfortable in my own identity as a non-biller. However, when I stuck to my plan and I drove my plan, it was really important. So I was constantly trialing and working out what worked and didn't work. But every time we grew, I knew I was adding value. Every time I looked at my attrition rate and it was dropping and people were staying longer, I knew I was adding value. Every time I looked at my client retention rate and we were increasing that retention rate and getting more out of the wallet spent from the client, I knew I was adding value. Every time our replacement ratios started to improve, I knew I was adding value. And there were so many sort of things from the KPIs that I looked at as an individual that I should be looking at as from my team, that I thought, if I can keep influencing those KPIs with my coaching, my mentoring, my training, and my development, my interpersonal skills with my team and not with the end client, I knew I was adding value. And I knew weekly where my KPIs were. And I knew if they were dropping by 1%, I knew I had to do something rather than leaving it for 3 to 6 months and then stepping in when it became a problem. So I was always working what needed to change. And I wasn't afraid to push. And I wasn't afraid to admit I was wrong. And I wasn't afraid to delegate and delegate things out daily to people who I thought that was better. And I'd sometimes sit with my team and I'd sit there and I'd help them and do certain things and I'd come down to their level. And I think to understand their issues so I could go away and work on my own made better progress, and it made it easier and it made it faster. And so that was my job, to facilitate their success. And from their success, I create my own success. But you'll never be successful with a leader unless you teach your team to succeed. And that's the bit that I sort of really homed in on, that it was all about them, not about me. And once I understood that and started to work on that, I started to see huge results and massive results. And it was all about thinking, right, how do I just train my head from being a consultant to a manager, but use the same methodology to get revenue coming through? And if you look at, say, and I'll use just 10 people, if I was one person on my own, to grow by 1/10 is quite a bit. But if I could grow 10 people by 1/10, that's a whole lot more. And that was my mentality.
And we know, don't we, how many recruitment businesses, good ones, have started by good people leaving big companies, setting up on their own because they were getting frustrated where they were. That's great for our business, because we employ more people, we get lots of entrepreneurial people into the business and leading businesses. But a lot of them, when I speak to them, say, I needed that push to start my own thing because I had that itch and I wanted to scratch it and start my own thing. But at the same time, I was also pushed away because I wasn't being developed. They weren't listening to my ideas. So just did it on my own. So if you can get that bit right, you can keep and retain good people.
Yeah, and that's the bit, retaining them, and it's understanding them. And I think this sort of moves on to the next question, that we come across a lot of billing managers who are hitting their own target but doing nothing to grow the team beneath them. So in fact, they are carrying the team and really masking poor performance in some ways. So in reality, they're just a senior biller with a job title. So how do you get people to actually lead when leading feels like it's costing them money?
For me, this goes back to the strategy of the business. If you are the business owner or you're part of the executive team, what is the strategy of your business? What is your plan? Having lived through COVID, having lived through economic downturn, and now we're in, hopefully not, but we're in a period where part of the world seems to be at war. All these things come to deflect our strategy because they're unforeseen. Yeah. But do you have a strategy in the first place? We always have this conversation now because the number of people that we see that we talk to, and they haven't really got a strategy, but they've got an idea. Now we can help them formulate that strategy, and then within that becomes leadership development, consultant development, client development, services development. So you've got to have that written down, and you've got to have that to be as flexible as it can be. I've always said that strategy is not annual, it's episodic. You can have a 3-year strategy, which is really important, but episodes come along and you've got to change it to make sure that you're getting the most out of what is in the market at that time. And the same applies to your leadership development. You know that you've got to build your people to be better people, to be more inquisitive and curious, to be able to sell wider range of services. The market is very different than it was 2 or 3 years ago, and it's going to be very different again in the next 12 months. So what are the gaps that you've got to close, and how are you going to close them? And if you can answer that question, or at least be able to pose the question to yourself, and then look at what the bits you've got to close, then you're on the way to making better people, retaining good people, and developing the ones that may be less good now, but can certainly be developed for later on.
So I'm going to push this question a little bit deeper. It's not just about the owner of the business that's still billing,
No,
becoming a non-billing manager. This is also about all those billing managers in bigger businesses becoming non-billing managers. And I think it's the structural problem of a billing manager who have never been taught to lead and never been taught to do that. And I think how we financially invest in these people is really important. And that also means the commission plan as well. So one of the most common scaling blockers in recruitment businesses is the skills that would make them great at billing work against them as great leaders. And I think some of the things that they think is money. So I think, restructuring your expectations, developing their leadership skills is most importantly when changing certain things. So changing the compensation is really important to make it a fair compensation so they can see how they generate their money, but make that compensation not about their performance, but about everyone in the team's performance. Therefore, they're focusing on their team and not focusing on their own performance. And I think that's when we start to see a different. And I said earlier, as one of the answers, it's important to have a fundamental structure and have that right and make these changes without the foundations actually crumbling. So having a structure for this is what you're going to do as a biller, and this is how you bill. If you want to become a super biller or a top biller, etc., that's the commission plan. That's what you get from it. But if you want to be a manager, this is how you become a billing manager, and this is how you become a non-billing manager, and this is how it looks. And so that transparency, I think, is the bit where everybody can see. And I think that career ladders, training programs, and understanding the behaviors of a leader that's required and promoting or recruiting the right person with those is really important. And when you start to monthly review your consultants, that's the bit where you start to understand right from an early days, what are their traits? What are they looking like? And it was quite interesting when I was at CP, some of the people who I saw struggling at billing, and once we started to do proper monthly reviews and look at behaviors, I started to discover leadership traits inside them. And I started to discover things that could really work and benefit me as a business, building stability in my teams. And suddenly delegating things to those people suddenly gave them a little bit of kudos in the business, and they started to make things that happened and started to lead other people to make a lot of money. But it also allowed my bigger billers, who were super billers and weren't probably interested in management at the time, actually concentrating on their billing rather than me just going to the biggest people. Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? So I wasn't slowing the team down. In fact, what I was doing was building the team and creating a faster paced organization because I was delegating to the right people. And therefore, I think behavioral charters, running them alongside your proportional ladders is key to understand. And it's the behaviors that you have as a biller, the behaviors that you have as a manager completely change. So making sure you've got the right people sat in the right seats and facing the right direction is really important while you drive the bus. You can't drive the bus and collect the tickets at the same time. You can't drive the bus and help people off the bus at the same time. You've got to have people doing the right things at the right time within your business, whether they're skilled to do that or not, or whether they're stepping up, and it's allowing them the opportunity to do that. But what you can't do is allow the bus to slow down.
And also, I think you mentioned it early on about commissions and rewards. People behave the way that they are rewarded. So if your leaders are rewarded on staff retention and customer advocacy, which I think are two of the strongest things we're going to see in 2026, how many of your customers are recommending you to other potential customers? And how are you treating your staff, and are they staying with you? And are they developing? Those two things. Now, if you're the owner, you're not going to reward yourself on that. But if you've got staff beneath you, and you reward them on those two things, and there'll be other things I'm sure in your charter. But if you're rewarding on those two things, if you get them right, will stand you in really good stead. One of the clients I'm working with now have an excellent lady who's going about her sector, and she's getting other people bumping into her at events like the one I'm at today, or online, recommending her to their friends who work for clients. So from a customer advocacy point of view, she's absolutely first class, and she's encouraged, and she's also bonused on that as well.
It's interesting as we sort of move down that channel, that if you slow your big billers down or your super billers down by giving them management, responsibility that they don't want, all of that stops that you're talking about there. All of those things stop because they feel they haven't got the time to do that. Or what they're not doing is taking their team with them, and therefore the team stops functioning, full stop. And I think it's how we develop that. And, you and I know that we've worked on lots of clients and lots of management training programs where we're developing people to manage people, not to manage a KPI board. And it's that management of people that differentiates good managers from people who are billing, who just want to manage. Why haven't you hit that KPI? Why haven't that KPI? There's a lot more to it than that. And I think that's the bit where we sort of move forward. And I think when you start to look at it from a management's point of view, and we start to build a business. And this is the bit that I've heard an awful lot over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. It's sort of like nobody in my network has really built a business, and no one has built a business in the way I want to build mine. How do you figure out the right moves when there's nobody around you who's actually done it?
I guess for me, I do hear that, not often, but a lot of businesses now are trying to focus on niche. So they're trying to build a niche. Either that niche could be by geography, by skills, or by sector. Yeah. And a lot of the bigger businesses, the Hazes of this world, the Reeds of this world, they're also trying to drill down to be a bit more agile. They're trying to drill down and say, right, you focus on that bit, that bit, that bit, that bit, and do it that way. And then you get that question of, well, I'm building it, but nobody else is doing it the same way. Well, that's okay. But where does it fit into the company strategy? Is the company strategy to build lots of niches? And then, okay, what support do you need? How are we going to do it? What does good look like? What does good life look like from your competitor's point of view? What's your aim? You're building this part of the business. What's your aim? What do you want it to look like? How many people? What sort of revenue? The usual sort of strategic questions, but then how does it add value to your business? I'm working with a company at the moment, and one of their service lines is equal to 3 times the value of running contract and permanent. They've got another service, so they can grow their contract and permanent numbers, and they will do. But there's another service line that they're doing that's 3 times more valuable. So let's get that built and continue to focus on contract and perm. Because in the world of work, which is changing, the world of us as recruitment is changing, we have to build what our clients want, what our clients value, because we have to retain those clients. So hopefully I've answered the question in that way, but you have a sprint plan for developing that niche, for developing the business. And if you're so good at developing it and nobody else has done it that way, what's in your DNA that makes you so good? And how do I replicate that with somebody else? And how do you help me replicate that with somebody else?
It's I wrote the question to try sort of coax certain things out and challenge certain things. And I think most recruitment leaders, and if you look at some of the businesses where we work joint on, I think some of the leaders after a while start to feel isolated. And some of them feel that they've outgrown their own peer group within their business or the people below them, and they've outgrown that. And yet they haven't found a community or someone to guide them that can match where they're trying to go to. And if you look at some of the companies that we're in, some of the people are a bit belligerent about where they're going to. Some of them are very focused on where they're going to. And yet it's how they get there. And sometimes their own experience of navigating their business to a certain stage has got them so far.
Yeah.
And then it's how do you get that little bit further? So whether they're listening to other recruitment leaders who've been there or they're moving on to it, they're there. So if you look at, say, the last 2 years, there are certain leaders who've been out there smashing it and absolutely having a great time. There's other leaders who are sat there looking for divine intervention. And it's not happening. And it's those questions, how do you do it? How do you do it? If they're left solely inside the recruitment leader's head, they eventually sort of will overpower the recruitment leader. If they actually go out and try get advice on that, and I'm not trying to sell our services here whatsoever, if you go out and get advice, then you start to separate the wood from the trees and you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You start to see the direction that you should be going in. And I think if you keep doing the same things over and over again and expect the same results, then you know that that's never going to happen. So the truth is that businesses that thrive and succeed have a strategy, as we've talked about so many times, and they follow that strategy. But what they do is they get experts in to help them build that strategy and keep them accountable. And that's the bit. And I remember, strange, as we talk about training, I remember going on a training course in Lucerne in Switzerland with Adecco. And they fly loads of people in from all around the globe. And they flew this little Italian gentleman in. He was about 5'3", 5'4", who was going to treat us about accounts and talk about accounts. And it was quite strange at the end of the day that one of the guys that was with me, who was one of the accountants for one of the companies, said, I've learned more from him than I did at Oxford. I got my degree at Oxford University. I've been more than a day with him than I did at Oxford University for 4 years. And he was talking about, you're probably sat there asking what I know about recruitment, etc., what I know about running a business. And when the Americans stood up and said, yeah, what do you know? And he said, oh, well, when Enron went down, they rang me to get advice on what's going on. So even the biggest global companies, and Enron was in a real sorry state because it was insider trading, insider dealing. And he said, I looked at their books for 3 months and then came back to them and said, you're all going to prison. All of you will go to prison because you've absolutely violated everything and done things. But it was him and his passing on his knowledge, even though it wasn't recruitment, that enabled us to look at how we reduce our DSO, how we increase this, how we reduce that, how we work on that. And it was simple little tips. It wasn't this really mind-boggling financial discovery. It was little simple things. And even the accountants in the room said, oh my God, he's taught us so much in a day compared to what we'd have got from 4 years at Oxford. And I think that's the bit that most recruitment leaders are maybe a little bit shy to go out and ask advice of people who have done things better, bigger, etc., etc. because they feel that they're going to feel inadequate when actually it's all about the learning experience. And you and I know, Dave, that passing on that knowledge is a joy. Passing on that knowledge is worth
Yeah.
passing on to somebody if they can develop it. And yet, how many people do we meet that tend not to even want to pass that knowledge or want to go beyond that first free hour that we give and then develop it beyond there because they feel that they can do it themselves and they've got a little bit of knowledge. Now they can go, but that little bit of knowledge is dangerous if you don't know how to complete and finish that knowledge trail.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's move on to the last question then. And this is the one that sort of I always like. We know that most readers say that they've read books, they've been to conferences, they've even hired consultants who once gave them a roadmap, but it's never implemented. What makes working with a coach who has been in their shoes actually different? And how do they know when they're ready to have a coach?
Well, I can only speak from the experience that I've had in the 10 years since I left, if you like, the corporate world and running big recruitment businesses, to being a mentor, a coach, a performance coach, and even from creating Jump nearly 6 years ago. It's lonely at the top. When you're running a recruitment business, whether you've got 3 people, whether you've got 30 people, whether you've got 300 people, it's lonely at the top. And I think if you can find someone with the right chemistry who gets you as a person and who gets your business and what you're trying to do, I think that's a really, really helpful thing. And that person will encourage you. You'll be able to offload on them. You'll be able to talk to them about all sorts of things. And that is so valuable to help give them a perspective of what they're doing in their business. And the other part of that, Hyde, is what you said. It's about accountability. When you're running a business or a department or you're leading a team, whatever it is, it's really good to have somebody from outside holding you accountable and help sharpening you to know which is the right way to go or which is the wrong way to go, or to bounce some ideas off. Yeah, a lot of the work that we do is working with founders and owners of organizations who just appreciate being able to bounce some ideas off, to work through some issues. And there could be issues about hiring, there could be issues about the sector, there could be issues about clients, there could be issues about accounting, tax, whatever it may be. Just to have somebody to be able to talk to about that and then to develop the business is really valuable. I look at the gym that I go to. A lot of the guys are doing high rocks type stuff, and the really good ones who are developing faster are the ones who've got a coach. Don't stand there. Move your feet a millimeter this way. What about this? Have you thought this? How about bending line like this? All of that comes from individual accountability, individual chemistry, and it does help to go there. It helps to develop them, and it's the same applies to business. All the best sports stars have coaches. It sometimes staggers me that not all the best recruitment leaders have coaches.
I think that's interesting. I think over the last sort of 2 years, I've spoken with hundreds of recruitment agency leaders, and I'll see this. There's a very healthy skepticism from the leaders about going out and using a coach and trying to use something different. Okay. And I think I'm very open about this. I don't think everybody knows all the answers, but some people know more than others. And so if I look back over that period, the majority of businesses who implemented or allow me to hold them accountable for the results actually had an amazing 2025. And this year doesn't look any different, although Trump this weekend may be trying to change that for them, but we'll wait and see what happens from that.
Hopefully it will be short.
Yeah. So if you take this webinar, I bet there's lots of leaders on here who want to ask questions, but have feared that others will laugh or that it might come across stupid. But I think the most important questions in the room are the ones that don't get asked. And if you don't ask those questions, then what are you failing? And what are you failing yourself? So I think there's a huge difference being told what to do and being supported in what to do. And I think that accountability structure that you talked about makes coaches stick when willpower doesn't. Because you're talking about there is, I've got a potential strategy, I've got this, but it's the willpower to deliver that. And I think willpower is one of the most overrated things in the world. And if you think about that, I love eating chocolate, and me and the missus keep saying, stop, we're going to stop eating chocolate, we'll cut the amount of chocolate down we buy. But, going to a petrol station, going to a supermarket, it's really hard because there's so much chocolate right in the position. And, we talk about positioning a recruitment agency, they position it where you're most likely to buy it. So yes, when I'm on my own, I sneak the odd bar here and there. But if I'm with Helen, never, because there's accountability there from Helen not to do that. So it's that accountability that I think that most recruitment agency leaders need. So it's not just about coaching another recruitment leader because we've been in their shoes, because that framework doesn't really give the right context. It's about giving them honest reflection and giving them the challenge and giving them something to face that means that they can grow and keeping them accountable to that. And I think it's on that readiness. The honest answer is that leaders who get the most from their coaches are rarely the ones who are completely ready to be coached. How many people do I say, I'm going to do this, 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 I'm going to do this before I engage with you? And then when I engage with them, I go, right, let's go back and look at everything you've done. Right, we need to change that. 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 Because all they've done is reinvented the same things they were already doing. So it's the one that recognize that the cost of staying where they are is higher than the discomfort of change. They're the ones that start to grow. And I think as a leader, that's the thing that you've got to recognize. The cost of staying where you are is higher than the discomfort of change. And once you change things, then your business starts to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dave, that's it. Next week, we've got a whole new webinar coming out next week in this series of 4. We're looking at all sorts that's going on in the marketplace now. Hopefully the things that are happening in the Middle East don't sort of curtail that too much. But next week, our webinar moves on to that we're going to look on building high performance cultures without the usual ping pong table and things like that. We're going to look about properly building high performing cultures irrespective of what the market conditions are like. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. Much appreciated. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Dave, thanks for your time. Enjoy your expo, and I'll speak to you later on today.
Have a good week, everybody. Thanks, Bye-bye.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.